Hey everyone, today we're diving into another terrifying case. Please support my channel by hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notifications. Gullibility, naivety, and being overly trusting. These traits can be dangerous, sometimes costing a person their life. Yet we all have moments when we want to believe in miracles, that childhood dreams can still come true. When something you've longed for seems so close, you can almost touch it. Caution, common sense, and even self-preservation can take a back seat. It's exactly this vulnerability that criminals prey upon. The case of a young French woman named Elodie Morel in 2005 shocked the country with its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more horrifying was the cold indifference of ordinary people who knew about her captivity and impending fate, but chose silence for a quick profit. This is a story about how not all dreams come true, and why you can't blindly trust someone who promises to make a fairy tale come to life. Who was Elodie Morel? Elodie Morel was born on February 18, 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a striking, almost angelic appearance. As she grew older, Elodie blossomed into a stunning beauty, with many suggesting she belonged on TV or on the cover of glossy magazines. As a teenager, she became obsessed with the idea of becoming a model. But coming from a humble family, no one took her dream seriously. In the 90s, Elodie sent her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never got a response. After graduating high school, she went to college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by the age of 25. It seemed like she had let go of her dream of becoming a model for good. By 2005, Elodie was working as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She frequently received compliments and noticed the admiring or jealous looks thrown her way. At 29, she still had a perfect figure, beautiful facial features, and could easily pass for someone in her early 20s. Even though Elodie never fully gave up on her dream of becoming a model, she no longer talked about it, convinced her time had passed. But in April 2005, she filled out an online application, attached her best photos, and indicated that she was still interested in pursuing a modeling career. The response didn't take long, but the enticing offer from a fashion photographer turned out to be an invitation to slow, agonizing death. A trap for the trusting. Around 2 weeks after she posted her profile online, Elodie received a flattering and tempting offer. She could become the new face of the famous English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract offered a payment of €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to finalize the deal, she had to meet with the photographer and do a test shoot. The meeting was set for May 2nd at a bar in the town of Aigues-Mortes. Thrilled, Elodie shared the news with her husband. Although he was skeptical, he didn't argue. Early that morning, the young mother left her son with her parents, got in her car, and headed to the arranged location. She planned to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. That evening, Elodie called her husband to tell him she was on her way to the meeting and feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck and asked her to call as soon as she could. It would be the last time he ever spoke to his wife. The last meeting. Elodie arrived at the bar as planned and sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she had supposedly been emailing with. But instead, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s joined her at the table. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explaining that he'd been sent to meet her and pick out locations for the shoot scheduled for the next day. Having no real experience in the modeling world, Elodie didn't sense anything suspicious and took him at his word. The man looked professional, spoke convincingly, and seemed to know all the details from her previous conversations with the photographer. Their chat flowed easily, focusing on Elodie's potential career. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself gracing the covers of popular magazines and thinking about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as darkness had fully set in, the man suggested they go scout for the perfect location for the next day's shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a charming medieval town, is filled with picturesque towers, fortresses, and chapels, plenty of spots for a stunning photo shoot. Excited and still unsuspecting of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. She was never seen alive again. What's chilling is that another man who knew the perpetrator personally and had heard about his vile intentions witnessed the entire interaction. He tried to intervene, but unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. A frightened informant. That same evening, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aigues Mortes police station. A frantic man claimed that a young woman was in grave danger and something needed to be done immediately. He didn't know the name of the potential victim or where she might have been taken, but he was sure there wasn't much time to act. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who often worked as an informant for the police, providing them with confidential information. He said that earlier that night, he had seen an acquaintance of his, Guillaume Mengot, at the bar. Mengot had ties to the criminal underworld and was known to be a cruel and dangerous man. The previous day, Mengot had bragged about meeting a naive, pretty girl online, whom he planned to kidnap and sell to a brothel in Spain for a hefty price. However, starting the search was difficult. The police had no solid leads, no name, no location, but they knew time was of the essence. By the next morning, they had a name: Elodie Morel. Her worried family contacted the police, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then simply vanished. At first, the police didn't connect this disappearance to the call from the informant. They suspected Elodie might have run off with a lover, but her family insisted that she would never abandon her young son or disappear without a word. The search for Elodie didn't begin until 3 days after she had gone missing. Precious time wasted. Tragically, Elodie was still alive for 2 of those days, held captive in a house in Aigues Mortes, where she was tortured and abused while her captors decided how to get rid of her. Interrogation of the witness and arrest of the suspects. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator handling Elodie Morel's disappearance began to suspect that she was the same mysterious woman in danger that the informant had warned about. Dominique was summoned to the station to give a formal statement, and when shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in the bar with Guillaume Mengot. When asked where he thought Mengot might be holding the victim, Dominique mentioned he'd heard something about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently shut down. A police team set up a stakeout at the location, and by that evening, they apprehended 48-year-old Guillaume Mengot and 53-year-old Richard Ligné as they arrived at the building. The role of the second man in this crime was still unclear and required further investigation. During a search of Mengot, police found Elodie Morel's credit card in one of his pockets, leaving no doubt about his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were brought to the station for questioning, though Ligné was released after a few hours due to a lack of evidence against him. Ligné lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but had never been in trouble with the law himself. The first story. Initially, Mengot claimed he didn't know Elodie and had simply stolen her credit card. According to his first version of events, he was at the bar on May 2nd when he noticed an attractive, well-dressed woman. He assumed she must have money and decided to rob her. Guillaume sat down at Elodie's table, complimented her, and offered to buy her a coffee. She mentioned she was waiting for someone but didn't ask him to leave. They chatted briefly, and at some point he managed to swipe her credit card from the purse hanging on her chair, slipping away before she noticed it was missing. Mengot admitted to knowing the victim, but claimed the entire incident was spontaneous, insisting he only stole her card and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Investigators confirmed he had used the stolen card the same day, withdrawing cash from an ATM on the outskirts of town. However, he couldn't explain how he knew the PIN if Elodie hadn't told him. His story sounded shaky at best. On top of that, A background check revealed that Mengot had multiple prior convictions, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a brutal rape. Despite his criminal history, Mengot hadn't changed his ways after being released, though he'd become more careful, trying to avoid another trip to prison. The second story. Things took a turn when police found Elodie's phone number in Mengot's phone along with their email exchanges about the photo shoot. This discovery completely contradicted his initial story, forcing him to change his account. He confessed that he had stumbled across Elodie's online modeling profile and started messaging her, pretending to be a photographer. The naive beauty was an easy target, and quickly agreed to meet without asking too many questions. Since Mengot had been using a female alias to communicate with her, he was nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the photographer she was expecting. But Elodie, trusting and eager, didn't find anything strange and agreed to go with him to scout for a photo shoot location late at night, even getting into his car without hesitation, something witnesses later confirmed. Once they drove to a secluded area, Guillaume veered off the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie hand over her credit card. When she refused, he grabbed her purse and found the card himself. Then he began demanding the PIN, but she still wouldn't give it to him. Furious, he slammed her head against the dashboard and started choking her until she finally relented and gave him the code. Afterward, Mengot locked Elodie in the trunk and drove to the nearest ATM to check if she had told him the truth. The PIN worked, and he drained her account. But with the money in hand, he started contemplating his next move, what to do with the woman now locked in his trunk. Hiding the victim and the arrest of the accomplices Guillaume Mengot, needing time to figure out what to do, decided to hide Elodie for a while and drove to his friend Richard Lignier's house. He told Richard about the woman locked in his trunk, mentioning his plan to sell her and make a big profit, which he was willing to share. It's important to note that Richard and his wife had previously worked at the same abandoned nightclub, he as a security guard and she as a cleaner. But when the club shut down, they both lost their jobs and were barely scraping by, with Richard turning to heavy drinking. Richard agreed to help and handed Guillaume the keys to his empty garage, offering it as a place to stash the woman. He didn't want to have any direct contact with the captive himself, preferring to wait for Guillaume to figure things out and hoping to get his cut of the money soon. As later investigations revealed, Elodie was held captive for over 2 days, enduring a nightmare of torture, assault, beatings, and the agony of hunger and thirst. According to Guillaume, he and Elodie talked a lot during those 2 days, particularly about their children, who were close in age. Elodie begged him to let her go, pleading that her son needed her. Guillaume claimed that at one point he actually felt sorry for her and was considering letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because it was unbearably hot in the garage, and she had already been there for 2 days. However, on the evening of May 4th, things took a drastic turn when Richard, heavily drunk, decided it was time to deal with the captive. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume insisted he had no part in the actual crime and only helped dispose of the body. However, he refused to reveal where they had hidden her remains. The search of the Lignier residence. When police raided the Lignier house with a search warrant, the couple appeared nervous, but not particularly surprised by the events. They let the officers in without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little interest in the ongoing search. During the investigation, police found several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, including her cell phone, some jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were discovered in the possession of Richard's wife. Other belongings, as well as torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. Even more disturbing evidence surfaced during the search of Richard's garage, located near their home. Inside the empty space, investigators found brown stains that appeared to be dried blood. They also found crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of laundry rope. Both Richard and his wife were taken into custody, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When questioned about how Elodie's belongings ended up in their home, the couple claimed that Guillaume had brought everything in exchange for letting him use their garage. They admitted to knowing he was holding a woman there but chose not to interfere, as Guillaume had promised to reward them. They also confessed to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope upon his request without asking why. The third story. Forensics confirmed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Even more damning, semen found on the crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's DNA, and saliva on the cigarette butts belonged to both the victim and the kidnapper. Elodie's family insisted she had never smoked in her life, as she suffered from asthma and cigarette smoke triggered severe coughing and choking fits. The horrifying picture became clear. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting her, likely torturing her, and forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse, changing stories and evidence. When investigators presented the forensic results to Guillaume Mangot, he once again changed his story. This time, he claimed that he and Elodie had indeed been intimate in the garage, but that it was entirely consensual. He said they had smoked together and talked a lot, and he had finally decided to let her go. However, he continued to insist that Richard Ligné had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared that Elodie might go to the police after Guillaume released her. This version of events had many inconsistencies, the biggest being that Richard had no reason to kill Elodie. First, he had never even seen the captive, and she hadn't seen him or any members of his family. Second, she had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she had no idea where she was and wouldn't have been able to lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was an ordinary drunk, incapable of causing physical harm to anyone. He was content with being paid in the form of Elodie's belongings and the promise of money from his friend once everything was over. The fourth story. As mentioned earlier, investigators found an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume had claimed that he'd taken pity on Elodie and brought her some water. However, tests showed that the remaining drops of liquid in the bottle contained a high dose of powerful drugs. After consuming such a cocktail, Elodie would likely have been unconscious or barely conscious, allowing her captor to do whatever he wanted. When asked why he had drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. Now he claimed that he had been ready to release her, and they had even agreed that she wouldn't go to the police. According to him, Elodie just wanted to go home to her family and forget about everything as if it had been a bad dream. But she allegedly tried to escape, leading to a struggle in which he hit her, explaining the bloodstains on the garage floor, then locked her inside and left. Guillaume said he had given Elodie the drugs to calm her down and prevent another escape attempt. He crushed some pills and dissolved them in water, then left the garage, returning 12 hours later. By then, Elodie was on the brink of collapse from dehydration. She quickly drank the water, not noticing the strange taste, and passed out within minutes. According to Guillaume, she died accidentally from an overdose because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs, something he claimed he hadn't considered. Once he realized she was no longer breathing, he placed her body in the trunk of her own car, which had been left in the parking lot near the bar where they first met. A few hours later, he drove the car to Richard's property, using the keys he had taken from Elodie. Even though Guillaume still refused to say where he had taken the car with the body, there were more inconsistencies in his story. For example, the rope found in the garage had sweat and skin residue from both Elodie and Guillaume, indicating that he had likely strangled her. All the evidence pointed against the suspect, and he knew it. Hoping to reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators and revealed that he had abandoned the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The vehicle was found on May 7th, exactly where he said it would be. It had been sitting in the scorching sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk had already begun to decompose. The autopsy showed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, sexually assaulted, and in the end, strangled to death with a rope. The trial and sentencing. The trial of the 3 people involved in the crime didn't begin until February 2008, nearly 3 years after the horrific events. Guillaume Mangot was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. As for Richard Ligné and his wife, they desperately tried to convince the jury that they hadn't known about the captive in their garage. They claimed they had simply allowed an old friend to stay with them for a few days without asking questions. But the discovery of Elodie's belongings in their home proved otherwise. The couple was charged with aiding and abetting and sentenced to 6 years in prison each. In 2010, Guillaume Mangot and his lawyer appealed the decision, trying to shift some of the responsibility for the crime onto the Ligné. This was their only hope of reducing his life sentence and lowering the minimum time he'd have to serve. On May 4, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the hearings, it was proven that Richard and his wife had known about Elodie's captivity and the mortal danger she was in, yet they did nothing. Not only did they keep her belongings, even giving some of them to their daughter, but they also provided Guillaume with everything he asked for: rope, water, and more, without questioning his intentions or considering the consequences. The court reduced Guillaume Mangot's life sentence to 30 years, with a requirement that he serve 2/3 of the sentence before being eligible for parole. The Ligné, for their complicity and failure to act, were each sentenced to 9 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There are a lot of shocking stories coming up.